I represent a lot of MSPs, and I'll tell you, they're just not all created equal. I've got one right now with a managed service provider where I know that they are responsible for 3 or 4 other incidents, all within a short time period. The lack of security is just baffling.
Hello. It's Jacob Hill with GRC Academy. Today, I'm here with Miss Sarah Anderson. Sarah, how are you today?
I'm good, Jacob. Thanks for asking.
Thank you so much for coming on. And folks, if you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to like, comment, share, subscribe, review, all the things. Helps me out. Thanks in advance. Sarah, tell us about yourself. How do you get to where you are today?
My name is Sarah Anderson. I am a cybersecurity attorney. I am physically located here in the lovely Baton Rouge, Louisiana, but I am licensed to practice in Illinois, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Louisiana. I predominantly do all forms of cybersecurity law and cybersecurity work, and that ranges from contractual agreements to incident response to vendor negotiations. I weigh in on law and policy for different organizations, both at the federal and the state level. So that's just generally what I do. I like to think of myself primarily as an attorney that can act almost as an interpreter between your CTO, CIO, CISO, and then the rest of the community so that everything just doesn't go, above people's heads or, in one ear and out the other, kind of like Charlie Brown. Like, wah, 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 wah. I am a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army Reserve, although anything I say here today does not reflect the opinions of the United States Army or my unit. I've just really enjoyed it. I've been a JAG officer now for 15 years. I've been in law practice for 15 years. And I started my own firm. It's not really recent anymore. Officially at the very end of 2019, but officially launched, my door, my sign on the door in 2022. So it's been a really great first 2 years, but I do love what I do. So I feel like when you like it, you sort of make your own luck.
So we're here to talk about IT managed service providers. As you well know, there's all kinds of different types out there. Talk to us about what the landscape looks like.
Well, before I get started, I want to give a little legal disclaimer that nothing I say here should be constituted as official legal advice or build any type of formal representation between myself and the listener, blah, 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 blah. In other words, if you want legal advice, you have to actually pick up the phone and call me and retain me. There is a huge discrepancy between what you think you're hiring sometimes in terms of an MSP and what you're getting. The problem with MSPs is it is a completely unregulated business. And for attackers or threat actors, it's like fishing with dynamite, right? Because they just need to identify one bad MSP, and then that MSP serves as just like a portal or a giant piece of bait, that is 100% going to work to get everybody within the MSP's, control, which will be all of their clients and anyone that they have sort of open connections with, especially any third parties. So it is a really, really dangerous game picking an MSP. But I will say I represent a lot of MSPs, and I will tell you, they're just not all created equal. And it's a lot of times about the clarity of what you think you're getting. Because some people go in, it's like any relationship, really. You go in and you meet with a contractor to do something work on your house, and you're like, oh, I thought I was getting this, and this is what they priced out. Well, there was a lapse in communication between what I thought I was wanting and what I'm actually getting. But what is it that I actually need? And that's another problem you see a lot of times with retaining MSPs is someone will say, well, I just need someone to manage my emails. And they think that encompasses a lot of work, and then as opposed to just the full aspect of your network.
And I'm just thinking about it from the perspective of a small business, right?
Oh,
they don't know how to run IT. And they know this one company who says, they do IT stuff. So naturally,
that must mean everything, right?
Yeah, they should be able to do it all. If you're a small business, what should they look for and what should make them kind of reconsider when they're looking at MSPs and trying to find the right one for them?
So there's a bunch. The first thing I want to see from an MSP, if I'm evaluating you provide services, is I want to talk to who is going to be my account manager. Sometimes these are salespeople, and then sometimes they're not just sales. Some of them are kind of a mix between actual sales and then IT and IT world and know enough about security to be dangerous. If I'm just corresponding with a salesperson, that's not going to work for me. I want to know exactly what products you're using. I want to know if you're an authorized reseller of those products, meaning you get either a discounted price or in some cases a kickback for that product, because that tells me you have an automatic impartial basis to that product. And I will tell you right now, any product, just Google it. The two MDR, EDR, or really there's 3 now with Defender from Office 365 being downloadable. But if you're not using CrowdStrike Sentinel-1 or Microsoft Defender, that's no good. I got a few that use a few other products. Those are usually substandard products. They pay the MSPs to market their stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's usually not a great sign, that they're not using maybe the best quality products, because those best quality products really invest heavily in research and development. So I want to know what products they're using. I want to know, what your vision would be for my organization. So what does that mean? I want to know what you think, needs to be done in order to get me to an optimum level. And then I want to prioritize lists. If your IT provider is not walking through that, or your MSP is not walking through that with you in terms of like, you're here, you're at point A, we need to get you to Z. If they're not kind of walking you through that and talking to you about priorities, that's not a good sign. That tells me that they think whatever you've got going on is going to be easy to deal with, which tells me, again, that they're not paranoid enough and they're not up for the job. If I've got someone in here that just walks in and goes, well, we're going to move you off of G Suite. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with G Suite. Not my preferred, but fundamentally decent product, the professional version, not the free. By the way, anything free, no good. But there's a reason it's free. But if I have an IT vendor come in and see me and they sit there and go, yeah, it's real easy. We're just going to hook you up with Microsoft Office. And, I've got some malware bites that I'm going to, that we can put on there. And we're going to do everything through Screen Connect. It's a great free tool so that I can come on administratively and manage everything. And we'll let you know if there's a problem. But if they come in and make it seem super easy to manage this, and they're like, oh, we don't, they don't ask me questions like, how many IP addresses? Are you on a static or a dynamic IP? How many service providers? If they don't ask me enough questions about what I'm doing, they try to make it seem like it's a seamless switch. That's a huge red flag for me that they're not doing a full due diligence appeal. So in other words, the more difficult it is, and I know this is very counterintuitive for the business itself as well as the customer, for you to sit there and finally determine what it is that you're getting, right? And for you to answer enough questions about your network so they know what they're selling and what's appropriate. The more difficult that process is, maybe difficult's the wrong word, the more timely, the more time consuming that is. I think that's a better sign that you're getting a more reputable vendor, because any vendor who will walk into a situation, issue you a purchase order for a few Microsoft licenses, and, download some stuff on your machine and then just send you an invoice for $400 every month is not doing their job. That tells me that they're playing fast and loose, and they probably aren't doing it intentionally. They just don't understand, right? The importance of what they're doing, the level of vulnerability that they are introducing themselves.
Yes.
I've seen a lot of cases where the problem stems with the MSP. I've got one right now that I'm sort of mulling over with a managed service provider where I know that they are responsible for 3 or 4 other incidents all within a short time period. And I know how it's happening because of the forensics that I've had performed. I just happen to be representing multiple clients that all use the same MSP. And the lack of security is just baffling. And the fact that MSPs, a lot of them are being bought up by private equity companies because it's an easy business model, right? You sell a license that you get a discounted rate, you tack on 25%. Right. And it's a flat fee, it's subscription based. And with all the subscriptions going to a mandatory 12-month minimum, right? You've got every customer on the hook for 12 months. So it's kind of genius. It's kind of like Netflix, right? Except not enjoyable. So they're doing all of this. They're being brought by private equity. So they're not always going to tell you when there's an issue. And a lot of them aren't contractually very detailed, which I think is a problem for both parties, because for the consumer, you don't know what you're getting. You don't know what your responsibilities are. It creates this gray area. And anytime there's gray, there's going to be litigation, right? And then for the MSPs themselves, if they don't have proper documentation, right, then they can be sued anywhere at any time. It's very confusing. What is their fault, which is, versus what's on the consumer, right? But they're presumed to be the professional and the expert. So they're not going to get the benefit of the doubt in an issue, right? And then you've got all kinds of legal compliance issues, especially if they're in a regulated data industry like healthcare, finance. Biometrics is huge. And it's just continuing to expand. So you've just got a lot of factors out there. So the first thing is, for me, again, how time consuming is it for me to get onboarded? What are they asking me about my network? Do they want to see if I filed for cyber insurance, do they, want to see a copy of my questionnaire that I gave to my insurance company? Am I required to have cyber insurance as their client? I require all my MSP clients to make sure their clients have cyber insurance, so that there's an additional level of protection for my MSP. What products do they think fits my model? Don't sell me, $35,000 Palo Alto firewall if I only need a, $3,200 Fortinet. What fits? Do they want to know how many IP addresses I had? That's a big one, because if they don't know what the inbound and outbound traffic is, how can you protect it? Right? Who's my service provider? Because if I'm using Comcast, why is there so much AT&T traffic coming through? So there's just a lot of different aspects of that. So again, how much work are they doing on the front end? The next thing is, do they ask me for a network diagram? If someone does not ask me for a network diagram, that tells me they don't understand their business, they don't understand, and if I say I don't have one, that's fine. That's not a question where it's a killer. It just means we need to make one. But the fact that they're not interested in knowing what I look like, that tells me then they don't know how to protect it. I had to tell a client the other day, hey, you got too many admins and you're a flat network, just as an attorney doing, a review, trying to get them insurance ready. I was like, that's a thing we've got to fix immediately. And if they're not doing that as your service provider and they're the ones with global administrative rights over your machines and your network, that tells me they just don't get it. Right. And then the other thing is if they are really only focused on providing those IT administration services, right? Like, we'll make sure all your software is updated, that your printers are all hooked up, to the internet address. And we'll set you up a guest Wi-Fi network, maybe, right? If that's really all they're talking about, then you're not getting any security services. If I'm getting security services, who or what are you using as your third-party SOC? In other words, do you have 24/7 monitoring? I want to know that they're using a reputable SOC if they don't have one themselves. And most don't, right? Another big one I see, and this, I think, if I could be sued for malpractice for doing something stupid, MSP should. But one of the things I see is, are you going to be the only administrator on my machines? Or am everyone going to be an administrator? And for anyone who doesn't know what that means, it means playing God in your machine. I'm a big fan of no one is an administrator, not even me. Right. So that inadvertently something can't go wrong without me entering a password to make sure that I know what I'm doing before I launch it. And so that is a huge one. If your MSP is letting you all walk around as admins, kick them out the door because he ain't protecting you. Those are definitely some of my big ones. And then the last one, the one I hate the absolute most, is Screen Connect. They provided a very valuable tool. It was very necessary. But a lot of people should be forewarned that there are free versions of this. And those are just ripe with vulnerabilities, and especially if they're not managed correctly, constantly updated. So if you're, a lot of MSP providers will call it like a third-party agent of some kind that allows them to come in and take over your PC so they don't have to come on site and address your issues that you're seeing that they're having. There's ways to do that without having to put in just a basic ConnectWise or Screen Connect connection. I'm just not a fan of those. I've just seen those abused in so many circumstances, or any type of free software. You'd be shocked at how many MSPs are running around with unlicensed pirated software. So you want to make sure all the software is fully licensed and that none of it's free. Because again, it's free for a reason. And often that pirated software can come with some additional goodies that you didn't really expect. You do not want. And one thing I didn't mention that I had written in my notes to mention is, if they have a website and they put all of their customers at the bottom of the website, not a good look. I know that's controversial because you want to make sure that people know, oh, look, I represent this police force and I represent this county and I service, whoever. And some of my MSP clients do that, and I tell them I don't like it, and they just tell me, well, Sarah, I'm sorry. This is where we agree to disagree.
Put a big target on them. That's what that does.
I was like, you just put this huge target on yourself. Like, do not. If they're sitting there telling you that, they're the best and these are all the entities they represent, it's not a good look. But if they do that, the nice thing is take some of those entities, Google them, and add the word cyber attack next to it in Google, and it'll tell you how great that MSP is. So there are very easy ways, if you're not tech savvy, if you don't know if they asked you enough questions, is they post those clients on their website and they say that they represent, the XYZ county of the state of, ABC, right? Google that and cyber attack and see when the last time they had one. Also, you want to Google the name of your MSP and cyber attack, see if they've been named in any articles. And then people have lawyers. Ask your lawyer to run them through a search engine. The nice thing, I will say the most powerful search engine that I have and that I use is not, DuckDuckGo or using a Tor browser, Onion website, nothing like that. I will say the best thing I get, my best bang for my buck, and I have purchased, by the way, separate PI software that does not compare, is LexisNexis and Westlaw, which are legal databases. I can run a more thorough background check on anybody using just those sources than anything else I've tried. And I will tell you, if you put in the name, you ask your lawyer to just check, they can tell you every time there's been a decision rendered against them. So that's another thing that I definitely definitely want to look for.
I really liked what you said about how to really evaluate the security culture at the organization. Another thing I would say is if you're onboarding an MSP for the first time and none of your process or how you work within your IT environment is changing, that's not a good sign.
No.
Are there any cybersecurity frameworks that you typically see maybe some of the more secure and compliance-focused MSPs out there implementing?
I think if you ask the MSPs, they'll tell you, we follow the NIST framework. Okay, which one? Which of the Series 800 are you compliant with? Some people say SOC 2, ISO, right? Those are extremely difficult to get. Only the bigger MSPs will likely have those because it's like an $80,000 to $100,000 endeavor to get SOC 2 compliant. So it's not super usual to see. And a lot of the times the MSPs aren't going to go through that process because if they fail, that's not great.
So we have an MSP we are honing in on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting ready to sign that dotted line, bring them into our environment and all those things. How can we strengthen the contract between us and the MSP so that we can give better protections to ourselves as a business?
As the business, the
Yes.
client. Okay, so the first thing is I want to ask if they will name me as an additional insured under their contract. Chances are they're going to say no, but ask. Or ask them if they have third-party coverage under their insurance contract. In other words, their insurance company may pick up the bill for my damages as a third party. So that's the first thing I want to know. The next thing in my contract is I want to make absolutely positive that in the contract, it is spelled out exactly what I'm getting, right? You do not want an MSP that just says, well, here's your proposal. And all it does is list software packages, right? Or equipment. And, and here's your reoccurring, maintenance fee. Well, what does that mean? Are you pushing out all the software updates? Does this include any type of routine support? Does this include any training for any of the devices that I have to use? Does this include recommendations for when it's time to swap out products? I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a place that they have ongoing MSP support, but they've got a server from 2012. I'm like, dude, this thing is made of plastic. You want to trust a 12-year-old piece of plastic with your livelihood? Someone should have recommended that you swap this out. I know it's not a fun conversation to have because it's expensive, but it should have been done. And then you want to know who your point person is for your account because you don't want to always have to go through the help desk system if you have a basic problem with your bill or you have a question, right? You want to know what your reoccurring costs are, right? Every single month. If a subscription is on a 12-month basis, I don't want a contract that auto renews because if I don't like you after the first year, I want to kick you to the curb, right? And most of these contracts auto renew for a minimum like 24 to 3-year term, right? The next thing is do they have an early termination fee? I see this all the time with MSPs. They will charge an early termination fee that used to be just equivalent to the software cost that they had to pre-purchase to provide to you, because a lot of them, like I said, are either a lump sum or they're already on a 12 or 24-month cost, right? But now they're charging the rest of the value for the contract, even the support services that they're no longer going to be providing once you terminate. I'm going to want to negotiate down that early termination fee, especially if there's any kind of security incident that would allow me to terminate the contract. So you always want to put someone in the position where they can be fired. And I know that sounds terribly draconian, but think about it like this. In any organization where the employees cannot be fired, it creates a sense of laissez-faire, just nonchalance.
Right.
They're just sort of indifferent. You always want to make sure you and that MSP have an arm's-length transaction, fair market value type of relationship that causes them to always be on their toes, that you can take your business elsewhere. So that's why I'm really always looking at, I want to know what the early termination fee says. And then what is the dispute resolution? These vary from state to state, but if you are hiring an MSP based out of Dallas, Texas, and you are in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, I don't want to litigate this if we get into a fight in Dallas, Texas. Because if I have to come to Dallas, Texas as the business when I'm in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to fight you over some money, I've kind of already lost, right? Because then I have to get to Dallas and I have to fight it in Dallas where you're the hometown player. I got to tell you, nothing makes me happier than when I'm in a fight in my own backyard, right? I don't want to be a fight in your backyard. I want to be a fight in my backyard, right? Especially with the judges in my area are all elected. So as opposed to appointed. So that's another thing is I want to know if we get in a fight, where's this going? And then if we also get in a fight and one of us wins or loses, who pays the attorney's fees? That's another thing I look at. I don't really have a huge preference either way because I think it's a good deterrent for people not to file stupid lawsuits. But I want to know, if I'm victorious, do I get some of that money back? Am I allowed to at least pursue it? And then also subcontracting. I don't want my IT subcontracted to some group in, a non-industrialized country that is doing this at random hours from their weird IP addresses, in someplace else, especially if they're subcontracting my IT work to Hong Kong or China, right?
Yeah.
That's not a good look, right? Because then you're communicating openly with China. And if you're using machine-based learning, they're seeing, your machine brain is seeing, oh, well, communicating with China is fine. I guess we'll just allow all Chinese traffic through, So those are sort of my big ones that I look at when I'm, looking at these agreements from the business side. Obviously, if I'm representing the MSP, totally different ballgame.
Right. All right. So you've hired an MSP and sadly they were compromised. Now what happens?
You need to assume you're compromised. And you need to assume that you've been compromised at a core level, as in, I see too many entities sit there and be like, well, we'll just re-download Sentinel-1 and I'm sure it's fine. That's not going to work. Because once they're in on, a memory level and they have that access, everything should be determined gone because they've left a back door open somewhere so that they can get back in, even if you set other kinds of traps. So the first thing that I would do is I would disconnect any communications with that MSP. So if they have, any type of remote tools that allow them to take over your machine, like a screen connector, ConnectWise, that immediately needs to be deleted. You then need to get all of the administrative passwords to your accounts, depending on which ones you have. This may not, by the way, do the trick. It may buy you a little bit of calm before the storm, but chances are they're watching you reset those passwords because they've already launched, credential harvesters into your environment, but you'd be remiss if you didn't do it. And then you want to turn off the port to your backup servers. So if you are using a cloud server, whatever port is feeding that, you want to go ahead, update it, and then close it, right? And then create a backup from that backup server on a hard line. Make sure you have another copy of your data. No one else can get to your backup data, whether it's cloud or on premises, right? If you're on premises, obviously make a copy of your disk. The next thing is I would log into Microsoft Office and I would check all of your policy and rules and start running some message traces so you can gather that data because those don't automatically get preserved, longer than usually, I think like 7 days or maybe 30 days. So you want to make sure. You also want to preserve all of your system logs. Now there's obviously tools out there like WebTool that can go in and log erase events before they even happen. So you may not get anything out of that, but you at least need to check because you want to gather really all of the information that you can legitimately, right? You want to cut off that access and then gather all of the information you can, including preserving your data so that when, investigations do come in, you can at least have something to look at. Right. And that has a good and a bad thing, especially if you are a federally regulated entity, because the absence of evidence sometimes helps you out. And then I always, tell people who, especially the MSPs, just look on Twitter, see if you can find it. If you're encrypted, see if you can find the password because Twitter is a powerful tool. I realize it's getting less and less used nowadays, but it's always a good tool. And then I always like people to, on a virtual browser, is get on, I always get the URL mixed up, but I think it's telemetry.ransomwatch.com, but it's a GitHub site and they post and pull everyone who has essentially been pwned and the group is advertising them as been pwned and see if you're on it because you could have been on it for a while and not known.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
But then you can at least check. There's another one whose name is escaping me now that I check, but I always kind of look to see, is my client already on this? When I get the phone call, is my client already on this site? Are people already bragging about it? Because then at least I know that we're probably in what I call a scorched earth situation. And then you want to check to see if you're missing money. There's two entities that, I get a lot of really, positive feedback about. The Secret Service, when they're not prepping for an election and an inauguration, is really responsive. They're a small entity, so, very small agency, so you need to give them some grace during, particularly heightened periods of time. But they are great. If you're missing money, you need to report it to them immediately. They can usually get back money that's left the country within the first 48 to 72 hours. And then if it's domestic, they have a better chance of getting it back in 72 hours. But you generally want to freeze your accounts if you think you're missing money or you see any nefarious activity and tell the bank to stop, allowing any activity on your accounts. If you are fully encrypted, the FBI is not a bad call. Now, they are different field offices have bigger strengths than others, right? That's just how personnel is, right? So you may not have the best network intrusion analyst, or digital forensic analyst in one state versus another state or one city versus another city. But the good thing is that sometimes the FBI has encryption passwords, like we saw with Black Cat last year, where they didn't tell anyone they had it, but they quietly went around and used it until everyone figured out they had it, right? So you don't know what you don't know. So that's why I always think it's good. Now, look, if you file something with IC3, the FBI's online reporting, it's going into a vortex. They get to it as soon as they can, but there's probably 50 million people doing that every single day. So pick up the phone. Don't say, well, I reported the FBI. No one, call your field office. The phone numbers are on the internet. Just call the field office, because otherwise it's going to take forever to get filtered to them, right? Another thing about law enforcement that is important is if you get sued for an incident, you always want to show you did everything in your power to mitigate the damages to the people that it impacts. And you want to show that you kind of went open kimono, so to speak, in terms of working with the authorities to do your best that you can, because nothing looks worse than a cover up. Just ask the people at SolarWinds and Uber, right? That's a quick way to go to jail. And so, or at least get a criminal conviction. And then I also say, hire an attorney. Why? And I'm not just saying this because I'm a lawyer. I get paid by the hour. Everybody hates this, right? But the other thing is you're going to have a situation where you have to review everything you've done wrong. Right? And you don't really want to do that with anyone other than your lawyer, because lawyers, the only thing that makes this worthwhile is we have this superpower called attorney-client privilege. Even a judge, a federal judge, cannot order me under any circumstances to disclose information that was communicated to me under the umbrella to privilege. And the umbrella for attorney-client privilege is very big. If my client is having an issue and they want to retain me to help them navigate through this horrible situation, the only thing I have to do is tell them, okay, I will represent you. And given the likelihood of potential litigation arising from this incident, all matters going forward should be considered confidential and privileged, subject to attorney-client privilege and the attorney-client work product doctrine. So basically, anything we develop, anything we discuss, as long as we are not doing that with a third party, right? As long as just me, if I represent GRC Academy and it's just me and Jacob talking and the founder of GRC, it's privileged. Right. Now, obviously, some things are not privileged, right? Some people abuse the relationship like, so I was buying drugs today. And like, that's not attorney-client privilege. Like, even if you say it to me and no one else, right? And I'm not implying that you would do that. But I'm just saying, as long as it's under the umbrella of the situation that they've been retained to discuss, it is privilege and we can't tell anyone about it. So the best place for you to be like, okay, so look, I know this happened. And we think it happened because even though we told our insurer that we had MFA enforced, we just had it enabled and it looks like it wasn't enforced. And that's how we think this happened, which is super basic, super common. Tell me. And I write it down and it stays in my lockbox and no one can get to. Because some people will sit there and say, well, I have this, confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement with my MSP. A judge can pierce through that in 10 seconds and they won't hesitate to if they think it's relevant. It doesn't matter. But an attorney-client privilege, they can't do that. So you want to tell all your deep, dark secrets to us lawyers. And then the nice thing about us lawyers and sending that email that triggers those privileges is then I go out and I retain the IT services on your behalf. And I make them part of my work product privilege by retaining them on your behalf, right? So that you're not retaining them. It comes through legal and out through legal, right? Those are some of the lessons we've learned in the large data breach cases, is that if I retain them and I treat them as confidential, right? And we don't discuss it with third parties, it'll stay privileged. So that's the other thing, because you're going to have to do a deep dive into all of your faults. And then again, we will help you manage the messaging, because here's the thing. What if it happens the day before payday? What are you going to tell your employees, right? Because you do not want to drum up unnecessary fear, right? And you also don't want to spread misinformation, because once you say something, you can't walk it back. I don't care what anybody says. Once it's out there, it's out. So that's one of the reasons I say we don't use the word breach, right? I mean, we don't say it because that has legal implications and intellectual implications in the public. It's all been breached, which means that information that was supposed to be private is no longer private. Well, if you're the department within a municipality or a small businesses that collects property taxes or confirms whether or not people paid their property taxes, that's public record. If that gets out, that's not a breach. I can look that up, that's not a breach. But if people say it's a breach, then it looks bad for everybody and people think they've been injured and they can get sued. So that is a big deal. You want to know what kind of data you're dealing with and you want to handle the messaging, right? So if you tell employees like, hey, look, we've experienced, some abnormal behavior. We're going to conduct some, maintenance over the next several days. We anticipate the network will be down while we implement, new procedures and implement, enhanced tools, whatever. You never really want to say improve, because then it implies that you are doing a great job to begin with, right? And then also your insurer can sometimes use that against you if you're in a coverage dispute. But you want to use very vague but truthful language, because we're thinking about what is going to look bad when I request coverage from my insurance company? We're thinking about like whose fault this is. Is it going to be my MSP's fault? Is it my fault? So I want to make sure we limit the language that is going out there. So those are the big things. But disconnecting from that managed service provider is so important because that's probably where they got in a lot of cases, especially if you don't have a great one, and getting just off of that train. And then once all of that's done, you've preserved your backups, you've mitigated your damages, but going to law enforcement, you've confirmed you have no money missing, right? You've retained an attorney to help you with messaging and help document the process that you're going through, and retained outside vendors on your behalf to come in. You need to be prepared to start over. And that is the worst feeling for so many people.
Yeah.
But there are ways to do it. You need to be prepared, especially if it's coming in through your MSP, that everything is compromised and there is no magic downloadable piece of software that is going to fix it. You need to start making lists, and this is a big one, and I have to do it for myself sometimes because I've had to reimage a computer or two, right? What applications do my employees absolutely have to have, and make that list, right? What data do they have on their individual machines that didn't back up to my network that they would want to preserve, on a thumb drive that then be run through sanitation later, or at least, isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you're going to do is you literally, unless you have, a server that's capable of doing this, you're going to have to reimage every single device and restore it to its factory settings, and then push out a new image that contains all of those applications that those employees need so they can get back up and running. And there are ways to do it quickly, and a good provider can help you with that, right? But you need to be prepared for that and to potentially restructure your network, especially if you had a flat network to begin with and a lot of users. If you have a flat network, you got 3 users, a big deal. But if you have, multiple servers, virtual machines, on-premises machines, or just all virtual machines, and 100 employees, 500 employees, 1,000 employees, you need to have a lot of segmentation built in. So you probably should start over anyways. So just setting those expectations.
Hey everyone, Jacob here. Let me tell you about today's sponsor, Vanta. As the number and severity of third-party breaches continues to rise, companies are increasingly vigilant, not just about how they handle their own data, but how their vendors do as well. For security and compliance leaders, this means more security reviews are coming across your desk every day, and valuable time is being wasted on manual security reviews. With Vanta questionnaire automation, security and compliance teams can complete security reviews up to 5 times faster, giving you time back to focus on running your security and compliance programs. Over 8,000 global companies like ZoomInfo, Smart Recruiters, and Noibu use Vanta to save time on security reviews. Visit vanta.com/GRC Academy to learn more about questionnaire automation. That's vanta.com/GRC Academy. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the episode.
Now, going back to what you were first talking about, disconnecting from your MSP for a small business that doesn't have IT people, you listed off a lot of technical things that should be done.
Yes.
They cut off their MSP. What do they do? Who helps them do that?
They call another one.
Okay.
Because the MSP is going to be more concerned about covering their own booty, especially if they suspect that they're the source of the problem, than to help you guys out. You call another one, or you call your attorney if you have an attorney that has been through this process before, and let me or somebody else retain them for you and get them in to start helping you. And that's something I do a lot of. I have MSPs that I really, really like. And, I bring people over, to them. And some of them aren't even my clients, as much as I may have tried in the past to bring them on board. A lot of times I've got to bring in somebody all brand new because I'm not going to get a straight answer from the former MSP on what happened. They're never going to give me the evidence I need without a subpoena. And think about it. If you're a client and they have, 5,000 clients, all those clients are going through the same thing. You think they're ready to help you? No, not at all.
Yeah.
So that's what I recommend. Some people call them a project manager. But again, project manager can't give you that confidentiality and, or can't give you those privilege protections. So I recommend calling a cyber attorney. It can help getting people in play. If they have insurance, and we hadn't really talked too much about this yet, call your insurance company immediately, file your claim. They'll put you in touch with a breach attorney. If that, breach counsel is decent at their job, and that's a big if the breach counsel is decent at their job, they will start bringing in those third-party vendors to help pull you out of the hole. Unfortunately, not all of them are created equal either. Lawyers, we're not all created equal, especially in this field. With breach counsel being such a big thing for the insurers, they're, firms like larger firms are more and more incentivized to bring as many people into the breach counsel fold as possible. So you'll have, I'm a partner, and I'm like, really, you graduated 3 years ago? Like, I'm not super impressed. But so they can charge higher rates on the contract and get more people into the fold that maybe don't have a tech background sufficient to really, take on the tasks. I recommend kind of getting your own counsel. And even if you just have local counsel, like every small business has a lawyer they've used once or twice, right? Call that lawyer, tell them what happened because they can't tell anybody, right? And get them to help you find the right answer.
Talk to us about cyber insurance and some of the gotchas there, because, people pay for the cyber insurance, they've got it, and they're like, oh, great, it's like my car. I wreck and they fix my car, everything's great. What actually happens?
Okay, so, car insurance has been around for about, almost 100 years. Property insurance has been around forever, right? Cyber insurance has only been around for like 25, 26, 1997, 27, almost 28 years. Well, I'm old. But it hadn't been around that long is my point. And insurance companies are driven by straight metrics. Everything is empirical and they have to calculate risk and probability. And so they are still studying it, trying to get it right, but they're getting a lot better. So it's not as great of a deal as it used to be. I was actually at this conference in March of 2020, like literally a week before the world shut down from COVID. The guy said, who was giving the presentation, I wish I remember his name, said cyber insurance is going to be like the new national flood insurance. And he gave us 5 years. And so we're coming up on that 5-year period. So I'm curious, I think you might be maybe a year off, but I do think it's coming rapidly because here's the cyber insurance works, right? They sell you a package that, you think you need. Unfortunately, a lot of it's focused on privacy and consumer notifications. And I will tell you that doesn't always give you the coverage you think it will. So I have clients sometimes they're like, yeah, I paid $2,500 for this policy. I made a claim and they told me there's no benefits. And I look at the policy and I'm like, I'm sorry, you don't really have a privacy issue per se. Here you got subject to business email compromise and you're missing, vendor payments. Like that's not a privacy issue off, right out of the gate.
Yeah.
So your coverage is going to be really limited. The other thing you want to look at is what kind of coverage did you get? Unfortunately, I see really, really low limits in the impersonation, social engineering, funds transfer fraud, right? Elements of every policy because those continue to rise in terms of, occurrences. But whenever people buy cyber insurance, if they don't have any coverage into those elements, I'm like, the policies also might be worthless. So you have people unfortunately buying policies that are really worthless. So you want to make sure you have someone review it who's seen a cyber policy, who knows what it should look like because it's cafeteria style. It needs to be tailored to your business. If you have 3 users, and your usual transaction is $5,000 to $7,000, then, $100,000 aggregate limit on your policy for social engineering is fine. Right. But if you have 150 employees and you're moving millions of dollars every day, $100,000 is not going to help you. It's useless, especially when you deduct the $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000, $20,000 deductible from it. So you're always looking for high aggregate limits depending on the size of your business. Right. And then you always want to keep your deductibles as low as possible. Now, obviously, if you got to look at, you got to look at what your business has and decide what you need. Do you have a really, really old network with a lot of things that are busted and broken and need to be upgraded? Don't go out and buy cyber insurance until you've elevated your standing because you're going to pay a lot more for it, right, going forward. And the other thing that people also don't understand is that you want to see if there's any way possible to get what's called betterment coverage. This is probably the biggest deal in addition to making sure you have all the frauds imaginable because these fraud definitions change all the time. As you want to try and get betterment coverage. Why? Betterment coverage is what will restore your network and elevate, your current position and get you something better than what you had before. Otherwise, all the insurance company is going to do is put you in the exact position you were in before with the exact same types of products or the exact same level of products. Well, you just got violated with those products. All you're going to do is set me up to fail again. And I paid $25,000 or $100,000 in deductible payments to you to basically put myself in the same position. That's not a great look. And then sometimes they depreciate the assets. And so you always want to try and get betterment coverage if you can. Betterment coverage is becoming less and less available and readily available, but you always want to ask that question and see if you can get it because that will pay to enhance your current cybersecurity standings. The other thing you want to know is who are your authorized vendors. So now we go back to the MSP area of the world, right? You want to know who they like to do business with. So every insurance company has a list of what they call panel vendors, preferred vendors, authorized vendors. And they will range from digital forensics companies to law firms to do your breach counseling, your privacy coaches, right? To consumer credit monitoring services, right? It will also include some managed service providers that do certain types of work, right? And unfortunately, these are the companies that the insurance company got the best deal with. These are not the companies. I had one adjuster tell me, and I will never forget this. I was like, man, you really don't understand your business. He goes, well, they're on panel with XYZ insurance company. They must be good. I'm like, no. I mean, no, he struck the best deal for the insurance company. It's a race to the bottom, man. You know, now there are some exceptions to that. So, I want to know who they get, but I will tell you the other thing, the breach counsel is going to be the one in a lot of cases driving this boat. And they're from a law firm that has a relationship and a contract with that insurance company. So every time the insurance company gets a phone call that says, we think we've been breached, they notify that law firm, and that law firm gets to pick up your case. So the law firm technically represents you on paper. But do you think if they do something or incur more expenses on your behalf that the insurance company doesn't like, that they're going to get their contract renewed? No, they're not, right? If they start making these responses longer and more costly, chances are they're not getting their contract with the insurance company renewed, and they just lost a huge chunk of business, right? Even at pre-negotiated rates. And by the way, insurance companies are negotiating with national level law firms. $8.95 an hour might be reasonable in California, but down here in Louisiana, if I tried to charge one of my clients $8.95 an hour, they'd laugh in my face. So you're not always getting a good deal. You're just getting the law of averages and metrics according to the insurance company. So that's a big deal to me. Once that breach counsel is hired, they're going to be the ones picking, your sort of panel vendors and choosing who you align with. And they don't always pick the best ones because they usually don't know much about security, so they don't know how to vet these people. And because they are incentivized to keep their costs low that go back to the insurance company, they're not going to pick the best ones out there. They're not going to be the ones going out and saying, you know what, Palo Alto Networks, Unit 42, they're a panel vendor, let's go with them. They're going to go for the discount version because it all falls back on how much money they authorized and spent on this particular. They don't authorize it. Recommended for authorization and spent on this particular claim. So that's why you want to know who you're dealing with. I'm not a breach counsel. I do not work for insurance companies, but I get hired a lot by people who don't like their breach counsel or realize things aren't going well to come in and kind of take over control. And then I tell the breach counsel, go back and do your little privacy analysis and call me when you're done. I got this from here. And adjusters hate that. But oh well, it's not my problem. So really watch what your breach counsel is pushing. And I always tell people, keep your local counsel engaged, even if the breach counsel takes over, because the breach counsel doesn't get to tell you what other attorneys you can work with. You can hire whoever you want to represent you, and the breach counsel needs to cooperate with them. But if you have your local counsel involved, someone who cares about the relationship with you, right? Because if I'm a breach counsel, I'm going to represent you one time in this one claim. My relationship with the insurance company is so much more important to me and my firm than this one-off deal where maybe I make $10,000 off a GRC Academy. I had one incident response company just say, yeah, we can totally remediate this network for $7,000. And this is a big company. And I'm just like, and they're like, I think it'll only take us like maybe 50 hours and we can do it all remotely. Huge red flag. I was like, no, I know exactly what you're going to do. You're going to order SentinelOne licenses and you're going to download them on all their machines after you install probably a free version of ConnectWise. And you're going to download SentinelOne on everyone and declare them good because you're going to run a SentinelOne report that doesn't uncover anything. I was like, you're not doing your job. And so, in that case, I had to fire that company, bring in somebody else. And all of a sudden the $7,000 estimate went up by 12-fold, 15-fold. We had to bring someone in to really do the job, and the client's ultimately in a much better position. Insurance company doesn't like me, but they pay for it.
If your MSP was compromised, when do you think they should fire them after it's all said and done?
All said and done, meaning you're recovered?
Yes, you've recovered. Yes.
Oh, I terminate them immediately. Let's say you had a great MSP. And you really did. Because I've got an MSP that's amazing, but compromises are unfortunately very inevitable. It just depends on the scale and how you react, but they're inevitable. I mean, think about it. Every major government organization whose sole job it is not to be compromised gets compromised. I mean, it just happens. It's just unavoidable. So let's say you have a great MSP, you absolutely love them, and they've been compromised. I would still terminate them because if they have a subsequent compromise, because they did not build back better or they did not properly remediate the situation, and you have a subsequent event, the fact that you went back to that faulty vendor, even if they're a great vendor, went back to that faulty vendor can be a sign of negligence and be used against you in court.
Okay.
So that's just like from a mitigation standpoint. Now, and the other thing is if they had an incident, how do you know as the client going back that they've remediated properly?
Yeah.
unless they've wiped everything clean, which I doubt they did because they can't have that kind of downtime. It's really hard to tell. So even if you loved them, I don't care if it's your brother, just be like, look, dude, I'm sorry. We got to part ways. I got to find someone else. This is just not going to work because you have to protect yourself.
What are some recommendations you would give to cyber and IT staff on how to best communicate with legal folks who don't know technology? Because you know technology, but the folks who don't know technology.
Yeah, like the HR people or something.
Yeah, sure. Talk to us about that.
All right. So this is the biggest thing that I see is that the legal folks who don't know technology will inadvertently dump compliance with legal regulations on the IT and cyber folks. And that is so unfair, right? Because it's not the IT and cyber folks to determine if they're compliant with a regulation. That's the lawyer's job, right? Or at least to make the recommendation based on what the lawyer's hearing. So I would be very adamant that when they make decisions or they get asked if they're compliant, say, I'm not an attorney. And I would document in writing, I am not an attorney. I do not feel comfortable making this recommendation. Can we please get a cybersecurity attorney to check? If that's not an option, because obviously you got to deal with personalities and politics within any type of any business has that. And that's not really an option. Say, I'd like to sit down with you and discuss exactly how we're set up. And then you can walk me through the requirements on my end and put the onus back on the attorney and force the attorney to either wave the white flag or sit down and be like, all right, well, I guess I'm learning this today. What is this? It's not rocket science. I'm not doing, incredible math problems. I don't even know what E equals MC squared means. I don't know what that means. But you don't have to. So I feel like a lot of attorneys sometimes run too far back because they think like, I'm an attorney. I don't do all this techie stuff. If I did, I'd be a neuroscientist or a doctor or something like that. It's not that complicated. They can sit down and look at it. They can pull the court opinions and have a court walk through and say, this was wrong. You should have done this. That's our job, is that we read through these things. So just encourage that attorney to sit down with you and discuss it and, break it down in plain language, to them and show them pictures. That's one thing I do a lot is I show them pictures. And I do have, minor plug, a CLE called Cybersecurity Basics for Lawyers on Sprout Ed, SPROUTED. And I try to really give these frameworks and basic concepts to attorneys that might have been watching that.
Awesome.
So I encourage you to kind of look for programs like that because you just need to know a little bit, but force the attorneys to do it. Do not fall on that grenade. And that's actually, issues like this are why CISOs are starting to purchase their own cyber insurance, like professional liability insurance. It's because they're being put in these very awkward positions that no one knows what to do with. And they're like, I'm responsible for legal compliance. Like, that seems odd, right?
In the CMMC realm, a lot of cyber and IT people in these small businesses, they're now like trying to interpret regulations themselves and all that. I like that concept of if you have a legal team, putting that back on them. Here's my recommendation based on what I know, what I see, but you have to make that decision.
Yeah, it's not yours to make. You shouldn't be put in a position to make it. Do not make it. Push that back on them because you will be the first one fired if something goes wrong. And like I said, there's been an uptick in professional liability insurance for CISOs because of these types of events, because no one really knows whose camp it is. But if it's a regulatory compliance issue, that's us.
Tell us some super crazy war stories, from your legal career and what you've seen.
I have a real issue that I've seen with companies that claim to do digital forensics. And this isn't much a crazy war story as it's just like a PSA. Digital forensics doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. It does not. Some people mean, oh, okay, well, let me take a look at your logs and see what I see. Oh, I don't see anything bad. You're all good. You always want to have memory forensics done. And some digital forensics people will tell me they do. Yeah, we do memory forensics. We do all of that. We got it. We know exactly what we're doing. Well, I caught one of them red-handed. They had no idea what they were doing and they didn't do it. So what they didn't know, and this was an entity that had gone through an event, breach counsel hires their favorite, which was the most bargain basement I've ever seen. And they come in and I said, I want memory forensics done on these machines. They're like, oh, well, we check the system logs and we use this free experimental beta version of this software that pulls all the logs for us. And we just don't see any abnormal activity. So we think these bad guys just got in and out. And I sit there and say to them, do you really think if you're a bad guy, you came into our system, which, by the way, services a lot of other companies, right? So we could have escalation of trust issues to other places.
Yeah.
And we're just like, we've seen everything we came to see. We're out. Or do you think they covered their tracks and sold us to the next bad guy? I was like, it's going to be the latter. No bad guy comes in and is like, hey, thanks for the hospitality. Best wishes. I'm gone. I
Right.
appreciate the tea. They don't leave. They stay or they sell you. And so I have this argument with them. Like, well, we just don't see it. So I said, all right, well, let's have a follow-up call next week, but I want you to run memory forensics on some of these machines, take a sample, and I want you to look for PowerShell abuses. I want you to look for abnormal traffic. I want you specifically to see if there's increased communications between certain countries. And I gave them a list of countries. And then I also gave them some hashes that I wanted them to just look for. And they're like, yeah. And they come back and they do their initial call and they say, we just don't see anything that you were talking about. And I'm like, this sounds impossible. So what they didn't know is I called a law enforcement agency and I had them run the exact same forensics that I requested. And they ran it and generated this ridiculous report. And so on the first call with the bad company, I had the adjuster listen. And I was just like, and adjuster's like, see, I just don't see why we need to spend any more money. These guys says we're doing great and that they just don't see anything. I was like, okay, well, we're going to have a follow-up call with law enforcement just to check in with them. I mean, they're free, adjuster. You can't be mad. They're free. And I pull it up and we do a screen share. Adjuster's on the phone. The other company's on the phone. And he's like, yeah, here's all the things we see. And he found a prior ransomware attack that Windows Defender stopped just randomly, right? He found wildcard DNS settings and DNS abuses. He found extremely long open communications, in other words, signs of exfiltration with, another country that's not the United States, he found backdoors open. He found multiple abuses of PowerShell. And then this other company also told me that that the Bloodhound software was a false positive for malicious activity because it's a good tool. And the law enforcement guy was like, it's been running like crazy. It's disguising itself as a virus. And he also pointed out, and here's all the evidence of use of them deleting logs. And so, the adjuster hears one thing the next week and then hears from this very reputable law enforcement agency the next week, two totally different opinions. Wow. And, just has to kind of come to Jesus. And that panel vendor is no longer on panel with that insurance company.
Yeah. Wow.
So that would be the biggest thing is like, so they say they know what they're doing. They clearly didn't run any memory forensics. They just ran their little beta software that pulled logs, didn't see anything, even though they charged us for it. And so they did it. So, it kind of falls back into the category of not everything is as it seems.
Wow. Well, folks, call Sarah. Where can people find you?
They can find me at legallycyber.com. So if anyone needs anything, just reach out. Even if you just need a referral to someone in your area, there's not so many of us out there across the country and we generally know each other. So I'm happy to provide you a referral. And as always, just do your best. If it's uncomfortable and an impediment to your workflow, it's probably working.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacob.
Hey, folks. Hope you enjoyed that. If you want to see more, be sure to subscribe and then check out this video.